All my life, I'd been fascinated by games of all types. When I got to grad school, I found out about the University of Pennsylvania Bridge Club, so I went and I learned how to play bridge. Richard Garfield was there, so we just started chatting, and it turned out, we both had a love of games. I had no idea at the time who I was talking to, but then again, he had no idea at the time who he was, so it worked out fine. And then one day, I was just wandering around, minding my own business, when Richard came up to me and he said, "Hey, I gotta show you this. What? I made a new game." This didn't surprise me since it happened all the time, and I said, "Sure, where do you want to go?" "Let's go in the astronomy lounge." And he had this pile of cards, and he told me the rules, and he explained, play a land, and so on. We played again, we played again, we played again, we played again, till at least 6 or 7 in the morning. And the sun was up, it was about 9:30, everybody was running around, and I couldn't believe it was that late. My name is Barry Reich, and I'm the first person to ever play Magic with Richard Garfield. I knew from the start, Richard knew from the start, that this was going to be huge.
Well, Magic was the evolution of my love of creating and tinkering with games. So it was really a natural thing for me to want to make a game where all the cards modified the rules and people could choose which they play with and therefore construct their own game in some sense. When I first started working on Magic, I was a graduate student in mathematics, just finishing up my PhD. And I was very interested in games, but it was a hobby. I was working on magical-themed card games way back, maybe even to high school. I looked through the games I had in my closet that I'd been working on, and one of them was this card game where we had this idea of your magical power coming from lands. I was hiking at Multnomah Falls with my family, and at some point I had this eureka moment. Sort of overwhelmed me as a designer that not all people had to have the same cards in a game. And that struck me as having a lot of different game potential. Whenever anybody makes a game, really, playtest is a really important part of the game design. And so my first playtester was Barry Reich.
This is what an alpha rare sheet looks like.
Then the second round was a few of the people from the computer science department and some math and physics grad students that were around. And then I extended it to the Bridge Club. Making sure that the game played well made a lot of different playtesters really important and valuable to me.
Well, I distinctly remember the first deck I ever got. We had a stable group of friends who played games all the time, and Richard had introduced us to a couple of his designs in the past, and it was sitting in Colonial Pizza at 43rd and Pine Street in West Philadelphia when one of my friends showed up and said, "Oh, here's Richard's latest game, here's a deck for you," and started trying to explain how this all worked. It immediately took over everybody's lives. When we weren't at work, we were playing Magic, or we were discussing Magic or trying to figure stuff out, or trading and trying to build decks.
You know, my early experience was just like I couldn't stop thinking about the game. I would go out to dinner with friends who had been playing Magic, and we would talk about the cards and which cards were better than others, and there would be rumors going around, "Oh, did you see that so-and-so has Mox Jet?" And so, at that there were no spoilers at that time. The only person who knew what all the cards were was Richard, and he made the playtest cards, and he handed out a packet of cards to each playtester, and that was that. There would be one copy of each rare card, and there would be a few copies of each uncommon and 10 or 15 copies of each common. And that's all the cards there were in the entire world.
We were initially given a 60-card deck. Everyone had equal amounts of all 5 colors distributed in their deck. But the rules at the time said you played with a 40-card deck. You had extra cards to play with, and that was usually the currency you used to trade, was the cards that you were not currently using in your play deck of 40. You had this extra to make your play deck work. It was all about the trading.
Watching the economic side of Magic evolve was during playtest was really exciting to me. Anything I knew about economics, I could at some point see reflected in the economy around how people valued and traded cards.
Well, in the initial playtest development time, there were a few things that popped out at us as things that needed to be massaged or tweaked. The first was how important it was to get the wording on the cards exactly right so that it couldn't be misinterpreted.
I remember one of the early playtest cards, I've had a playtester. He said, "Richard, I have the most powerful card. I'm sure I'm going to win now." And I said, "Really? What is that?" He goes, "It is a card, when you play it, you win next turn." And then I saw the card and it said your opponent loses next turn, which meant your opponent lost their next turn, had to skip a turn, not that they lost the game. I had to be much more careful with my wordings after that.
Lightning bolt, your unicorn. The main thing that that I personally gave Richard feedback, and I think many of the playtesters were in that same camp, well, two things. One was, this card sucks, or this card is broken. It was almost always one or the other of those two things. And then another major one was, what happens if I play Giant Growth on my creature and then you lightning bolt it? Well, what happens if I lightning bolt the creature first and then you play Giant Growth? And then we would go back to Richard and say, hey, we don't know. How did you mean for this to work? And sometimes Richard would tell us, and sometimes Richard would say, I don't know. How do you think it should work?
Even then, we still didn't see quite how dangerous some of these cards were, like the Moxes, like the Black Lotus, because again, with only two, there weren't enough to know. We suspected. We definitely suspected. I went to one of the playtesters and I said, I really want your Mox Emerald. And he said, what do you want for it? Here, give me a forest. I said, you want me to give you a forest and you're going to give me your Mox Emerald? He said, yeah, they're the same thing, right?
My name is Dennis DeTurk, and I'm a mathematics professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Richard was an interesting student. He was an organizer. Richard got all of the graduate students and some of the young faculty, like me, involved in playing all kinds of games. I mean, standard games, card games and board games, but also games of his invention. It was always interesting to wander into the graduate lounge and see what was going on. And Richard, as a graduate student, studied combinatorics, which is the mathematics of counting things, or patterns or networks. So it's interesting that Richard's field of combinatorics sort of played almost directly into his love of games, because when you play a game, I mean, you can ask questions like, how many different outcomes are there? I mean, of course, okay, I win, you lose, you win, I lose. You maybe say there too, but in fact, how many ways are there to play even a relatively simple game like tic-tac-toe? I mean, there are dozens of possible games, but when you get to something much more complicated like chess or even a card game like Magic, I mean, there are billions of ways that the game can unfold. I mean, that's almost a pure combinatorial problem. So his theoretical math work played right into his design of games.
He was the energy. He was the guy who put all the life into the gaming. And we were just creating a game that we wanted to play. The easiest way to describe his personality, I think, is to remember that he's infamous, at least among his friends, for never wearing matching socks.
He's like a little elf. I don't know quite how to say it. He's somebody who just has a natural enthusiasm for games, and he's completely unpretentious, and he loves to see people playing games together and relating to each other and having a good time.
Richard, to me, is unique. He can turn a straw and 3 sugar packets into a fun game while we're waiting for our food at a restaurant. He taught me it didn't matter whether you won or lose. That was not why Richard was playing. He wanted to see new things, he wanted to see creative things, and he was just focused on the game. He just wanted to make it fun.
The first few months we played the original prototype of Magic was without question the best few months. That was the best time of playing Magic because it was all new, it was a universe we were exploring together, and nobody knew what was in that universe. And that adventure, for want of a better word, was as much fun as I ever had playing the game.
Magic has certainly infused all aspects of my life. It's certainly the biggest game I ever made and the biggest game I ever will make. I've designed games passionately since, but knew that it was I was never going to do anything like Magic again. There was a point when I designed trading card games for Wizards where I would try to improve on things which I saw wrong with Magic. And it was so often that it turned out that what I saw wrong wasn't really wrong. Oftentimes there were strengths that I hadn't recognized. And every time I would return to Magic, I was always excited to see where it was now, and it's still that way. It's like I come in every few years and work on a set with Wizards, and Magic has this interesting thing where it's always fresh, but it's also always changing, and I hope that can be maintained as strongly as it has in the next 25 years as it has in the first 25.